Our team members take pride in our roots. We grew up on farms, we live on farms, and we serve farms every day. At Armor Animal Health, our veterinarians help you detect diseases through our state-of-the-art lab. Our pharmacy then helps deliver the right solutions to keep your herd healthy. With locations across the United States, we have the ability to supply thousands of products to your door. When you kick off your boots at night, know that defending your herd isn't our job, but a way of life.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this week's Have You Heard, the animal health video series by Armor Animal Health. My name is Ashley Abbott, and I have worked for Armor for 5 months as a territory manager in Eastern New York. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Kevin Cain from Multimin90, and he's going to give us some information about how to use Multimin90 and to maximize performance in beef herds. Dr. Cain, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am Dr. Kevin Cain. I am originally from Miller, South Dakota, and I went to Kansas State, did my undergrad in animal science, and then vet school there as well. Returned back to Miller, South Dakota, where I practiced for 14 years, and then I've been with Multimin now for 2.5.
Great, thank you. So as we go through this, we would like this to be interactive. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to post your questions and we'll try to get those answered for you. So to start us off, Dr. Cain, why is it important to inject Multimin90 at branding and first vaccination?
That's a great question, Ashley. And so when we look at what the immune system requires to mount a good vaccine response and to be able to process those vaccines and have good protection from them, it's heavily relied on these 4 essential trace minerals. And so it's a key to supplement those at the same time as we're giving those administrations of vaccines. And as we look at this graph here, it'll show kind of what the trace mineral status of that newborn calf does. And so the way Mother Nature is designed, that cow is going to transfer a lot of her trace mineral status off to that newborn calf when it's a fetus right before it's born. And because of that, that's the way they're designed, is that calf is going to get virtually 0 trace minerals through the colostrum or the milk. And so when we look at this graph and look at that red line, that is what the trace mineral status of that calf will do very quickly after it's born, is because since it's growing rapidly and there's no trace minerals going back into its system, that red line is going to decline very rapidly. And so as we look at this, we've identified 3 critical production points on this graph that highlight where we recommend and utilize an injection. And so when we look at what that does and what that trace mineral status does, we can focus on those 3 areas and show what Multimin can do in response to that. And so when we look at what an injection of Multimin can do, we can, there we go, we can see we have identified those 3 areas. And so instead of that rapid decline shortly after birth, if we utilize an injection at birth, we can increase that trace mineral status so it does not go down so drastically as we approach that first branding or first vaccination period. There, when we're going to give those vaccines at that point in time, that calf is we're going to utilize another injection of Multimin to increase that trace mineral status, get a good vaccine response so we have good protection from those vaccines throughout those summer months. Then as we approach that weaning preconditioning period, that calf's still maintaining a good trace mineral status. So, but then when we process those calves, administer another round of vaccines, we can incorporate another dose of Multimin at that point in time to increase that trace mineral status, to get that good vaccine response, and then maintain that calf until he's out on a total mixed ration or a good oral supplementation program. The reason this is because when we look at what a calf's trace mineral status does, the copper levels will decrease 70% by the time that calf is 56 days old. And so when we approach those very low levels at that point in time, right before we're going to do that branding first vaccination, we really require that copper in that immune system to mount that good vaccine response. So That's why we have created that critical production points based off that information and address those points where those calves need it the most.
Great, thank you. And I know that trace minerals are really important to overall cow and heifer reproductive success. So when do they actually need that the most?
Okay, and so when we look at the trace mineral demands and requirements of a cow or a heifer, they change pretty drastically throughout the course of the year based off of the requirements and their production levels. And so as we look at this graph here, we can identify what that trace mineral status does of that cow. And so as we talked about, that cow is going to exhaust a lot of her trace mineral status off to that newborn fetus right before she calves. So we're going to see that red line, which is representing her trace mineral status. It's going to decrease very drastically after she calves. As we can see on that graph, that red line, it's at the lowest point there at pre-breeding or breeding. And so it's even recognized by, a lot of the oral supplements, and that's why they have kind of a breed back type mineral or something with some chelates in it at that point in time to get that trace mineral status back up. And so if we identify some critical production point levels on that cow's trace mineral status, we can focus on where we need to give that injection and why. Because Multimin does not replace good oral supplementation. It's just there as a strategic injection to fill those gaps when we need to, based on demand and production levels of that animal. And so being that is an injection of Multimin is absorbed very quickly after it's given. And so we can effectively and quickly increase that trace mineral status to correspond when those animals need it the most. And so as that graph is highlighting there, those two critical production points, if we utilize an injection prior to calving, we're going to make sure that that cow's got good, adequate trace minerals to transfer over to that calf. But then also post-calving, we're still going to see that line decrease because of that, but it doesn't go near as low as that red line represents. If we then come in there at pre-breeding or breeding and utilize an injection there, because it's absorbed up rapidly and quickly, it's back in their system, and we're going to maximize that trace mineral status to coincide during that breeding season.
Great, thank you. So we had a question come in. What would be the return on investment on breeding performance when Multimin is used?
And so when we look at the return on the investment, sometimes that's going to depend upon each individual operation and how they're utilizing their oral supplements and everything like that. But the way we look at it on the reproduction side of things is if they pick up 1% increase in pregnancy, that's going to more than pay for the Multimin itself. And so anything after that is going to be added return on their investment. Same way when we look at the calf protocols on the vaccine side of things, we've done some vaccine studies that show an increase in 27% of those calves responding to 2 doses of vaccine. And so when producers look at the dollar amount that they have invested in those vaccines, getting an additional 27% of those calves to respond is going to be a very good return on their investment as well.
Sure, that makes sense, of course. So what about bulls? Is there any use for Multimin90 in bulls?
Yes, on bulls, those are an animal that they compromise, 50% of the genetic composition of that next calf crop. And so it's very important to take good care of those. Sometimes those guys have been pulled out of the cows here last fall, and they've maybe been neglected or put off kind of the side. And so making sure that those bulls have a good trace mineral status, because these 4 trace minerals are not only as important in reproduction on the female side, but also on spermatogenesis in that bull as well. So when we focus on that bull, given a dose of Multimin about 45 to 60 days prior to turnout, or if they give another dose there, 45 to 60 days before breeding soundness exam, and then given another dose there prior to turnout. When we kick those bulls out, we want them to be, fully functional and doing their job and getting things done out there. So we want to make sure that they've got what they need to get a good breeding season done.
Okay, and why does the dose decrease as the animal ages?
Okay, no, that's an excellent question. So those based off of the NRC requirements on trace minerals and the demands and requirements for those animals. So as we look at that younger calf, being he is growing more rapidly and he's utilizing that trace mineral status for that immune response and growth, they're going to have a higher requirement or demand for those trace minerals. So that is why the dose for that animal less than 1 year of age is 1 mil per 100 pounds. And then when we look at that animal between 1 and 2 years of age, it's 1 mil per 150. And then when we go to a mature animal over 2 years of age, it's 1 mil per 200 pounds. Even on those big mature animals, cows or bulls, generally you're not going to ever need to exceed a 7 mil injection. And so that's what we recommend at the highest dose. And that is labeled for sub-Q administration in that BQA triangle in the neck. And so we want to make sure that since this is a volume type injection, make sure they give that down low in that BQA triangle. And then if they have to give another injection on that same side, they give a smaller dose, like a 2 mil vaccine up high in that BQA triangle.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. So another question, should Multimin be used no matter where in the US you live, or is it a regional thing? And are there any times when it should not be given?
That's a good question. So we do have some areas, especially in the South Dakota, North Dakota, that have higher amounts of selenium in the soil and in the forages. And so we always want to be cautious in those areas, because when we look at those, being this product does have selenium in it, we do not want to increase that or cause any kind of overdose or toxicity issues. So if anybody is concerned about the selenium, make sure you call us or talk to your regional veterinarian and see what they say about it. And because of that, we know that some of the mature cows, selenium accumulates over long periods of time. And so those mature animals that have been in those areas and have been exposed to it for several years, that tends to just kind of keep on increasing over those years. We did a pretty good study last fall, testing over 200 head of calves in these high selenium areas. And because those calves are growing rapidly and utilizing those trace minerals, we feel pretty safe and confident that we can go ahead and do that full calf protocol, or especially when they're at that weaning preconditioning time, and Multimin should not have any adverse effects there.
Okay. And if BSE and turnout both fall within 60 days, would you still give 2 shots?
You know, that's a great question. We tend to like to get that first dose in there, 90 days ahead of time to correspond, to that breeding soundness exam. And then one there, if they're going to give one at that prior to turnout, make sure there's about a 90-day window right around that period.
Okay, thank you. And now, what about drought factors? How is Multimin used in drought scenarios?
So, drought's kind of an issue that we always tend to try to stay away from as much as possible. But, knowing the fact that a lot of the United States is dealing with drought issues right now, and it looks like, maybe there might be some relief in the future, but we might have to kind of face that fact the more the drier conditions continue. So as the drought happens, that's going to decrease those forage availability, and those plants are going to be, not have as high quality in them as well. And so when we look at that, that can tend to create some issues as far as forage availability. But then when we also talk about antagonists, so when we talk about antagonists, we talk about sulfur, moly, iron, and calcium. And those can tend to become more concentrated in those plants at that point in time, especially on the water sources. If we're in areas where there's some high sulfur, high moly, and those ponds, dugouts, or dams have less water available in them, those sulfates will become more concentrated in there and pose more of an antagonistic effect in those animals. Antagonists are elements that those animals are going to consume either in the forage or the water, and when they're present in the rumen, they can tie up some of that copper and selenium and zinc and manganese to where the animal cannot absorb it and have it available for that animal. And that is the nice thing about Multimin, is being it's a unique product and an injectable, it bypasses any antagonistic effects. And so this product, you inject every single animal so they have it available and can utilize. then it's also not going to have to compete against those antagonists that are in that environment or in the forages or water.
Great, thank you. I don't see any more questions coming through. So is there anything else that you would like to mention to viewers for them to just know about Multimin?
Yes, and so when we talk about the cow and the heifer on the reproductive success, we also look at, AI protocols. We've got some very good studies and data out there showing increases in pregnancy rates with bull just turnout, but then also with AI projects as well. And so one of those being is a 460 head cow project we did at Kansas State. Those cows were on a very good oral supplementation program managed by PhD nutritionists there at the university. And in that group, the control group, they had a really good time AI preg rate, but the Multimin group had a 9% increase. And so with producers looking at doing a time AI type protocol or anything like that, utilizing Multimin to get more of those AI genetics or the more success out of that investment they have invested in those cows in that time AI setup could be very valuable as well. We also then, when we look at younger cows versus older cows, Multimin, we know that in some of these areas that are competing with some of the higher selenium levels, that might be an issue, but if a person is looking at with some of these drought factors facing, right now, if they're able to look at maybe utilizing Multimin on those younger cows, such as those wet 2s, 3s, or 4s, those animals have a higher trace mineral demand, and those animals are always the tough ones to get bred back and stay in the herd. Most of the time, these producers have more higher dollar value invested in those animals and don't want to lose those, and that's generally going to also represent the better genetics in their herd. And so I know that Multimin may not be able to be utilized on all the cows on a ranch, but maybe if they just focus on those younger animals and utilize it there to increase their pregnancy rates or get more of those to breed back, could be very valuable at the end of this drought period. If these producers are looking to have to liquidate some cows due to the drought, they might be able to just move more of those older cows and maintain some of them younger cows in their herd.
Sure, yeah, that's great advice. It looks like we're all out of questions. I don't see any new ones coming through. So I do want to take time to thank you, Dr. Kevin Cain, for taking the time to be part of our Facebook Live today. And we certainly hope that everyone watching learned something that you can use on your own operation. Feel free to contact us with any questions and share with your friends. Do you have any closing thoughts, Dr. Cain?
Actually, I'd just kind of like to mention that in that K-State study with the time AI, we did pick up a 9% increase on time AI, but when they followed that group out the next spring and looked at calving distribution, the Multimin group had a 12% increase in that first calving distribution, that first 20-day period. And so that was pretty instrumental to us, because not only did we pick up a 9% increase on time AI, but we picked up additional 3% of those cows that did not stick time AI to cycle back right away, bull breed, and still maintain in that first calving distribution. And so if producers are looking to, tighten that calving distribution in their calving herd and have kind of more of those calves born up early in that first 20-day period, which is going to result in bigger, heavier calves at weaning to sell, that could be a big advantage there as well.
Great, thank you for that. Would you like to share how people can find out more about Multimin if they're interested?
Yeah, so we have an excellent website. It is multiminusa.com, and there's a lot of information there. There's a podcast, a lot of testimonials of people using the product and why they are and where it's really helped out their program. And so I definitely recommend you go to our website, check that information out there as well. And you can contact our sales reps. They are available on there as well. And then, if you ever have any questions or anything, you can email us or your sales rep and let us know, and we'd be more than happy to help.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for your time today, and we really appreciate it.
You bet.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.